برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. We ask Allah to enable us to learn and teach, remember and remind, to give and receive benefit and gain, to encourage adhering, holding fast to the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, to call to guidance and lead to all that is good, seeking in that Allah's countenance, pleasure, nearness to Allah and His reward. Glorious and exalted is He. We intend what the author of Risala, Al-Habib Ahmad bin Zayn al-Habashi, intended, as well as our sheikhs, and what Allah knows of virtuous intentions, and we ask Allah to accept by His mercy, subhanahu. And He is the most merciful of the merciful. Ya Arhamar Rahimin, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. From the du'as of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, he said, O Allah, your mercy encompasses everything and I'm a thing. So envelop me in your mercy. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So we are doing our second of 3 Hajj portions. And we will study duties. Last time we studied conditions and integrals. Insha'Allah, we'll do duties today. We asked Allah to enable us to define Hajj in our last lesson. So how is Hajj defined? How is Hajj defined? To seek something out, and that is in Arabic, or to intend something, betake oneself directly to that thing which is sought, qasd. Tayyib, in law, in Sharia, how is it defined in the Shara'?
Going to the house for the performance of rituals.
Yeah, going to the house for the performance of rituals, of nusuk, which is, and we're translating those as rituals. You can also call them rites. When they talk about ibadat in a fiqh book, ibadah you could translate as worship or rituals. And then when they speak of ibadah in the context specifically of Hajj, they call it an-nusuk, the rites of Hajj and Umrah, or the rituals of Hajj and Umrah. So they have books about Hajj and Umrah. For instance, a famous book in our school by Imam al-Nawawi, it's called Al-Manasik. Al-Manasik. It's about the rites of Hajj and Umrah, the rituals of Hajj and Umrah. And the Prophet ﷺ said, خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكَكُمْ. So it's Qastul Bayt lin-Nusuk. Qastul Bayt, intending the house or going to the house for the performance of Nusuk, of rituals or rites of Hajj and or Umrah. La ilaha illallah. So, how did our author describe the conditions of the obligation of performing Hajj? Who must perform Hajj?
Obligation on every free, legally responsible Muslim, and the condition that they have to
Yeah, freedom, Islam, accountability, meaning reason and maturity or puberty, as opposed to someone who's insane, or as opposed to someone who hasn't reached puberty, though they may be carried through Hajj, like even as a baby. And then ability. How did he define ability? How is ability defined by the author of Risala Jamia?
You have enough to go, come back, and take care of your dependents while you're away.
Yep, that you are able to afford the journey going and coming and the maintenance of your dependents while you are gone, in the case of those who have dependents, and so on. La ilaha illallah. And again, there's longer details. We talked about Hajj on behalf of someone else a little bit. That's talked about in longer books. In this lesson, we ask Allah to enable... what are the integrals of Hajj? What are the pillars of Hajj? And that's from memory. How many pillars of Hajj are there? And what are they? 5. What are they?
entering the state of
Ihram, Arafah, Tawaf, Sa'i, hair removal. That's right. We talked about times of those. First of all, what is Ihram?
a state of pilgrim sanctity.
He defined it more specifically. What is ihram? Meaning, yeah, as an integral, it is the intention. One enters that state by the intention. La ilaha illallah. Niyatul dukhuli fil nusuk. Intending to enter the rites of Hajj and or Umrah. Someone says, Nawaitul Hajj wa ahramtu bihi lillahi ta'ala. I've intended Hajj and entered the state of pilgrim sanctity thereby, for Allah exalted is He. Or Nawaitul Umrah wa ahramtu biha lillahi ta'ala. I've intended Umrah and entered the state of pilgrim sanctity there through that, or through it. So that is ihram. Ihram is not the clothes. So if you put on the clothes and fly in the airplane and land in Jeddah without having intended, you have made a mistake that can be corrected by slaughtering or driving back beyond the miqat, which isn't very far at Jeddah, if you're able to go anywhere, but you're not likely to control your own transit when you're in the kingdom during the Hajj days. So be mindful of that. When we were on Hajj this time, we were driving down for Hajj from Medina. They passed the miqat and paused briefly and made their intention without getting down and praying and everything, which are sunnahs, not obligations. One brother was asleep on the bus. Drove him by the miqat. Problem, and we'll talk about that today. Okay, so al-ihram. Al-ihram is that intention. La ilaha illallah. Okay, what is the time of Arafah? The beginning and end time for Arafah?
Her prayer from the 9th of Dhul-Hijjah until Fajr the 10th.
Yes, as Zawal, the entrance of the Dhuhr time on the 9th of the Hijjah until the rise of the true dawn on the 10th. During some of that span, you have to be on Arafah, even passing through. La ilaha illallah.
Consciously.
Yeah, conscious or asleep, but not like not comatose or unconscious. La ilaha illallah. Okay, what are the times for entering ihram for Hajj? Yeah, those are the Hajj months, which is a type of miqat, which is a type of time-space designation for Hajj. La ilaha illallah. Al-ihram. Arafah. When are the times for, beginning and end times for tawaf al-ifada, rukn tawaf, the integral tawaf? When are its times?
The midpoint of the evening of the 10th of Dhul-Hijjah until the end of your life.
Yeah. So it comes in with the mid of the night, the middle of the night, between Maghrib and Fajr on the eve of the 10th. That's when Tawaf enters, its time begins, and it lasts as long as you're alive. Okay, what about the time of Sa'i, of going between Safa and Marwa? After Tawaf, right? So it must be performed after either the integral Tawaf or Tawaf al-Qudum, which is a sunnah, the arrival Tawaf. When you first reach Mecca for Hajj, it is sunnah to do a tawaf, which is the arrival tawaf, and you may do, in the case of arriving for Hajj and doing tawaf qudum, you can do your sa'i at that point as well. When does the time for sa'i end? Yeah, as long as you're alive, you can do sa'i. What about the times for La ilaha illallah? What about the times for shaving or shortening the hair? Is it the same as tawaf? You had your hand?
After the midpoint of the 10th of Dhul-Hijjah.
Yeah. It is the same as tawaf. It enters with the midpoint of the eve of the 10th of the Hijjah and lasts as long as you're alive. As long as you're alive. La ilaha illallah. I think that's it. And we're going to do the same today, inshaAllah. Okay, so for today, our objectives are we ask Allah to enable us to answer questions about the validity of tawaf and sa'i using your notes, your book and notes. That's one, right? Using your open book, you're able to answer questions about a valid tawaf versus and sa'i versus them being invalid. And we're going to discuss the obligations of these two today, and it's right in your text. And then list the duties of Hajj from memory. So we talked about the integrals of Hajj, the arkan. Now we're talking about wajibat or duties, the wajibat, as well as the beginning and end times for these from your notes. So the beginning and end times from your notes, but we want you to be able to list the duties from memory, as well as how to properly make tawaf and sa'i. Tawaf. Tawaf is from the best of ibadah when you are in al-Masjid al-Haram. That is how you greet the Masjid Haram. You greet the sacred mosque by doing tawaf. And there's sunnah to do 2 rakas after your tawaf. But it's a mistake when you first enter the masjid to do tahiyyatul masjid rather than doing tawaf. Tawaf is how you greet the house. And it's the best of worship, or from the best of worship there, is to perform tawaf. Though just being there is of great benefit, and even gazing at the Kaaba is a type of worship in the Masjid al-Haram. La ilaha illallah. Okay, so tawaf and sa'i, and they translate tawaf also as circumambulating the house. It's going around the house. And sa'i is when one goes between Safa and Marwa. So he says, necessary for tawaf are, all right, so he's mentioning obligations of tawaf. You could also understand these as like the obligations that make it valid. That for tawaf to be valid, you have to do these things. So we want you to be able to recognize a valid versus an invalid tawaf if basic questions about those two are asked. So here he said necessary for the tawaf are the covering of the awrah. So the legal nakedness. That's how Sheikh Faraz Rabbani Hafidhahullah translates it. We like that translation. Or we could say nakedness defined by the Sharia. That must be covered during tawaf. We talked about this in prayer. What applies there to the prayer applies here to tawaf. So a woman may show her hands and face. And the amount of her face that she covers to properly cover her hair, that's excused. Otherwise, and her hair and neck and so on. Otherwise, a woman's not supposed to cover any of her face during ihram. However, you got to cover a little bit of it to be sure that all of the hair and the other parts of the awrah are covered. That little bit is excused, but basically her face may show, and her hands, but in our school, not her feet. So the hands up to the wrists, up to but lower than the wrists, may be shown, not the wrist itself. Some of the hands should be covered, so none of the wrist shows, and then the face may show, but all of the hairline and ear and neck and even below the chin, if we're being strict, that must be covered, as well as the feet. The hands and face are not awrah. What's beyond those are. So she covers all of that for tawaf. A man must cover between his navel and his knees, and he should cover both of those as well, and slightly beyond the navel, so that all of the navel is covered. If his ihram, which is very easy, especially depending on your anatomy, if the izar that you're wearing, the wrapper that you wear, if it drops, it's very easy for your navel to become exposed, and that will invalidate your tawaf, because you can't have a shirt on. You have an upper garment, unless your upper garment's covering that. If it drops below and your awrah becomes uncovered, your tawaf will not be valid. So the awrah must be covered. The awrah must be covered. La ilaha illallah. And just like prayer, the same considerations as prayer. It has to be with a material that prevents at a distance that you would normally speak to someone from, which is a cubit and a half. or no, excuse me, 3 cubits. 3 cubits, that's about 1.5 meters. You can't see through the material to the skin color of the person. You can see through the material and see their skin color at that distance. It's not thick enough. It must also be worn. It must be worn. Someone doing tawaf in a little tent. Woman doing it in a hodaj. That doesn't count. Even if people can't see you, it's not worn. And also, it must cover the awrah from the sides and above, not from beneath. Right? So, same considerations of the awrah as in prayer. And this is a common mistake that Muslims make. I saw it just yesterday. Men, for instance, if they wear a low waistline and they're praying and their pants slip down and you can see the very bottom of their back, which is lower than the navel falls on the corresponding side of their body, that's some of their awrah has shown. So during the prayer, he is legally naked. We can use that term. Meaning the Sharia would define him as improperly clothed for that act of obedience. So it's something to be careful about and cognizant of. And as we discussed in Al-Dhakhira Al-Musharrafa, there's a meaning of shyness and modesty towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost, and feeling shy about one's own vices. So covering the awrah is symbolic, and it's an important condition of the prayer, and also it's a wajib. It's a requirement of the tawaf. At-tahara, being pure in a state of tahara, which means ritual purity, from things that invalidate it, meaning ritual purity, and from najasa. So basically that means you have to be ritually and physically pure. Not required to do wudu or ghusl because you've done them, and not with unexcused filth on your body or clothing or a place where you're stepping during tawaf. Just like prayer, right? You have to be ritually pure. You've made a proper ablution, and you have to be physically pure in your body, clothing, and the place that you are, your place of prayer, or here, the place that you're walking. However, open, large masajid, because of bird droppings, that is an issue, and it's impure, though it's with conditions, it is excused. On the droppings of pigeons, for instance, that is one of the types of excused filth, provided that either side isn't moist and it's not deliberate and it's difficult to avoid. La ilaha illallah. There's a note there. If you take a small child, a baby, and do tawaf with them, they should not have a soiled diaper. In your case, for your tawaf, if you're carrying them, and in their case, for their tawaf. That's something to note. La ilaha illallah. There's a detail here. How in the world does a man in the Shafi'i school do tawaf in a crowded space with women bumping into him who are following, for instance, Imam Abu Hanifa's school, and they don't have socks on? The answer is it's very difficult. It's somewhat difficult is the answer. It's somewhat difficult. And that's one of the times where people may follow another imam. And Hajj is full of circumstances like that, where one needs to opt to do taqleed, following another of the jurists. So the other schools, a woman merely tapping him or kicking him in the back of the heel because it's crowded and she was pushed against him or something, that wouldn't break his ablution. And even a weak position in our school that is not the dominant position, that the wudu of the person who touched is broken, not the one who was touched. So even in our school, there's a position that carries him if he's cautious about not himself bumping into people. But if they bump into him, he's excused. And then there's another detail that you will understand later when we talk about being released from ihram. And the integral tawaf of Hajj is possible to do when you are partially out of ihram, so you can be fully clothed. And a man, you could even have khufs. And then it's unlikely, just because it's your neck and your hands, and face and neck and hands, and it's relatively easy to prevent yourself from bumping into someone with just those 3 areas. So it's possible, at least in the rukn and the farewell tawaf, to actually not not bump into someone. And also there's those other schools that carry us. And the differences in the judgments of the imams is a mercy for the ummah. It's a mercy for them. And some of our teachers would say, no one follows a given imam except that in certain circumstances he will need to follow another. So, and Hajj, there are many occasions like that, given the difficulty of the rite. And the Prophet ﷺ was very easy on Hajj. When people asked him about, I did this before, I did that, and so on, he was easy, and it's a time to be very wide in one's understanding of the Sharia, as not to cause undue difficulty or even a great danger for others. La ilaha illallah, purity. And that the tawaf is 7 circles. Where do those circles begin? They begin just before the black stone. You have to cross in front of the whole black stone and do that at the end of your tawaf too. So you cross the whole black stone, not part of it, like you went around and got to the black stone and then said, okay, I'm going up to Safa. Go beyond the black stone and then up to Safa, for instance, or there's other sunnahs you would do first. So the circle starts at the black stone. Which way are you going? You're going the right direction, that they call counterclockwise, but that's the direction that we move. And the angels circumambulate the throne of God. The angels circumambulate the throne of Allah. And our circumambulation is reminiscent of that, of the circumambulation of the angels of Allah's arsh. And if you were to face the black stone, as is recommended by some of the jurists, with the beginning of your tawaf, you'll notice that you're headed to your right side. You're moving in the direction that was to your right when you're facing the Kaaba. That's the way you do tawaf. So then he says that the tawaf is 7 circles inside the mosque and keeping the house, the Kaaba, on one's left. So there's a couple things there. The Kaaba, the tawaf must be in al-Masjid al-Haram. There's a large courtyard that is part of the Haram, that is part of the sacred precinct, the sanctuary of Mecca, that is not part of al-Masjid al-Haram. So you go through one of the gates into the masjid from this courtyard. And you could go around the whole courtyard. Tawaf is not valid there because you're not in the mosque. Prayer is valid there with conditions. And it even has a multiplication of reward. But tawaf is not valid outside of al-Masjid al-Haram. That's a point. At least in the past, I don't know if they've extended the endowment of the mosque and if that's even legally possible, but Safa and Marwa were outside of the mosque, right? And it's difficult even the way the halls are set up to do tawaf there, but bear in mind that you're out of the mosque there, or you were at least historically. La ilaha illallah. In the mosque with the Kaaba on one's left, so that's if you're the direction you're headed properly, you must keep the Kaaba on your left. And then what if the crowd spins you? The crowd pushes you and you take steps while you're facing the Kaaba or with your right side to the Kaaba. Those steps do not count, so you have to be careful. What if you do something that we saw someone doing this year, and they wanted to protect the women that they were with, so they all linked arms in a circle around the ladies. So some of the guys had their back to the Kaaba, some of the guys had their right side to the Kaaba, some of their guys were facing the Kaaba. That's not valid. The left side should be towards the Kaaba. La ilaha illallah. And that one is not actually inside the Kaaba. So you can't go around in 7 circles inside the Kaaba. So you have to be inside the mosque, outside of the Kaaba. So why do they say this? They say this because the original foundation upon which the Kaaba was built and upon which it was re-erected by Abraham and Ismail alayhimus salam, it was shrunk by Quraysh when they rebuilt it in the 35th year of the Prophet's life. That was when he settled the dispute over the black stone. and gave them away for all of the tribes to raise it up on a mantle, and then he placed it in its place. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So when they rebuilt the Kaaba, they rebuilt it due to damage from flooding and fire, and they ran out of building materials that were purchased from a source that they felt appropriate for the Kaaba, and they wouldn't use money that was ill-gotten to purchase those building materials. They ran out of materials, so they made the Kaaba slightly smaller in some of the directions from its original foundation. So the Hijr, the Hatim, the semicircle portion, where the rain spout falls into, a number of cubits in that direction, the Kaaba actually extended, and also a little bit in some other directions. So they say that if you were to do tawaf around the Kaaba and cut through the Hijr, your tawaf is not valid because you're actually walking over the part of the Kaaba and you're within its original foundation. And then also if you are walking around the Kaaba on the buttress, there is a buttress of the Kaaba in at least 3 directions. Actually, I believe all directions now. And that buttress to it was shrunk from its original foundation. So some of where the buttress is actually over some buttress. Thank you, buttress. Thank you. The buttress at the base of the Kaaba, in Arabic, shadarwan. If you were to walk around the Kaaba on that, you would be walking on some sides within its original foundation. So you'd be going inside the Kaaba. And our jurists are real strict, even dragging your hand along it, because your hand is over it. Your whole body's not outside of it. So be careful. Don't do tawaf dragging your hand along the Kaaba. And certainly not walking around the shadarwan. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. So those are some obligations of tawaf. And if it is done that way, with the awrah covered in a state of physical and ritual purity, beginning just before the black stone, crossing with the whole body across the black stone with each circuit, keeping the Kaaba on one's left, inside al-Masjid al-Haram, outside of the Kaaba, then that is a valid tawaf. And 7 circuits completes a tawaf. Each one is called a tawfa or a shawt. And all 7 of them completes each of the tawafs of Hajj. And also if you do a voluntary tawaf, you should do it in sets of 7. And there are some more details in the longer books, but this is a good introduction. So remember that and note that, and you will be able to make a valid tawaf, inshallah. And we ask Allah to accept. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And I'm sorry, there's a problem with your stream. Those of you who are trying to attend Hanafi, I don't know what's wrong, but we'll work on those, and there will be a audio recording that will come. Sa'i is going between As-Safa and Al-Marwa. As-Safa and Al-Marwa, the 2 mountains that Sayyidina Hajar went between, when looking for water for young Ismail alayhi salam. So he said, the sa'i must be done 7 times, must be after the tawaf, and must begin at Al-Safa and end at Marwa. Right? So each time between the 2 counts as 1. So you start at Al-Safa, and that's how it's mentioned in the Quran. Al-Safa is mentioned before Marwa. Prophet ﷺ said, begin where Allah began. So you start at Safa, going from Safa to Marwa is 1. Going back from Marwa to Safa is 2. So you begin at Safa, and the 7th is completed, ending at Marwa. La ilaha illallah. And they are 7. And being in a state of purity and covering the nakedness are not required, that they are recommended. And also, as we mentioned, it must be after tawaf, either the integral tawaf or the tawaf qudum, as we mentioned before. And we've discussed its time. La ilaha illallah. So, wajibat. wajibat, requirements, or duties, he said. Duties. We haven't been translating it as duties, but he translated it as duties. Duties, requirements, wajibat. Wajibat of Hajj. There were 5 integrals and there are 5 duties. Makes it easy to remember. 5 and 5. So what are these 5 duties? The wajibat, duties of the Hajj, are being in a state of ihram from the miqat. Being in a state of ihram from the miqat. It means the limit, but this is a physical boundary that was demarcated from the time of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. So during the time of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, specific locations were designated for people to enter ihram when they are coming from various regions to the Kaaba. So various regions have their own boundary or limit at which or before one must enter ihram. So the limit, the place of entering ihram for someone who's dwelling in Mecca is Mecca, and there's some details there. So the door of their house, basically, the door of their dwelling. And some of us may do this when we do Hajj Tamattu, which is part of a longer discussion. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And those who are coming from the west region of Yemen, it is a place called Yalamlam. Those who are coming from the eastern region, that's called An-Najd, the elevated eastern region of Saudi Arabia, it's Qarn, a place called Qarn. So you have Yalamlam and Qarn. For people from Iraq and Central Asia, Dhatu Irq. And again, these are all known locations. From people from Egypt and the North Africa, and also Europe and typically North America, the route the planes fly, the miqat is Al-Juhfa. It's a place on the Red Sea coast. For Al-Madinah and Ash-Sham, Syria and Lebanon and Palestine and Jordan, the miqat is Dhul Hulayfa. Right, so you have to enter ihram there or before there, and not cross that. Like if you're parallel to it, not go closer to Mecca than it, even if you don't go right over it, as the case with a plane, for instance, or you're driving a road that doesn't go straight through the miqat. You may not cross that boundary prior to. You must enter ihram prior to crossing that boundary, or at that boundary, prior to going beyond La ilaha illallah. To accomplish this wajib, this obligation. So you must enter ihram. It is a duty before the miqat, or before passing the miqat, or from the miqat. Usually, like if you're going by land, you'll stop there. You may do ghusl there, change your clothes there, pray 2 rakas that are sunnah before ihram, and then make your intention either immediately after those 2 rakas or while departing from the miqat. In the case if you visit Medina and then come down to Hajj from Medina, you actually stop. It's likely that you'll stop at the miqat. In a plane, they'll announce it before you get there, right? And you just want to be careful. Don't go asleep on your plane and land in Jeddah having already crossed your miqat. That's a problem. La ilaha illallah. So that is a duty. Ihram from the miqat. So just ihram is an integral. Ihram from the miqat is a duty. So someone who makes their intention late, they've done the integral and they've neglected the duty. So they're going to have to slaughter as an expiation for that. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the next lesson, inshallah. La ilaha illallah. Spending the night before the day of slaughter at Muzdalifah. So spending the night at Muzdalifah, that is the eve of the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. That is a duty. Spending the nights of Tashriq at Mina, 2 or 3 of them. The throwing of stones, he says against the pillars, The Jamra, those pillars mark the place where you stone, and actually you're stoning their base. The target is not the pillar, the target is the base of the pillar, marked by the pillar standing in it. And now it's just a big funnel that it falls down to that place. So it's real easy now. And then the farewell tawaf. Okay. So, La ilaha illallah. We want to talk a little bit about the times of these. We'd like you to be able to recall these first, and then their times. So the 5 are ihram from the miqat, spending the night at Muzdalifah, and that's the eve of the 10th, spending the nights of Tashriq at Mina, stoning the Jamarat, and the farewell tawaf. 5 duties. 5 duties. La ilaha illallah. Okay, so we've talked about where the miqats are, the limits are, the spatial boundaries are. La ilaha illallah. Spending the night before the day of slaughter at Muzdalifah. Okay, so what are the times for this? The time for spending the night at the Muzdalifah is that you must be present at Muzdalifah for a moment past the midpoint of the night of the eve of the 10th. So midway between Maghrib and Fajr on the 10th, you must be for a moment at Muzdalifah after midnight, and then you may move on. So it's accomplished by just a moment, being there for a moment after the muntasaf al-layl, after the midpoint between Maghrib and Fajr. And it lasts until Fajr rises. And it's best to stay there and pray Fajr, then move on. For those who don't have an excuse. La ilaha illallah. Spending the nights of Tashriq at Mina. Okay, what does spending the night of Tashriq at Mina mean? It means spending most of the night. So if we were to say there's a 12-hour night, Maghrib is at 6 p.m., Fajr is at 6 a.m., you have to be there 6 hours and a minute. For instance, 6 hours and 1 second. So the greater portion of the night, you were on Mina, right? So you don't have to be there all night, but you have to be there most of the night to accomplish that duty. And those are the evenings of the 11th, 12th, and 13th. Some people only stay 2. And those who want to depart Mecca early, they may only stay for 2 nights if they like. And they must stone only 2 days. And leave after, or stone only 3 days and leave after stoning. Stoning the Jamarat. When does the time for stoning the Jamarat enter? One stones just the large Jamra, Al-Jamra Al-Aqaba, on the day of the 10th, the Eid, the day of slaughter. One stones how many Jamras? 1. Which? Al-Jamra Al-Kubra, or Jamra Al-Aqaba. That's where the Prophet ﷺ gave the oaths of allegiance to the Ansar before making his hijrah. They met during the Hajj time at Al-Jamra Al-Aqaba. That is one of the places where we stone. One stones it, in each of these stonings, one stones each Jamra with 7 stones. The time for Jamra Al-Aqaba is from the midpoint of the eve of the 10th until the end of the days of Tashriq. So what is the midpoint of the eve of the 10th? Halfway between Maghrib and Fajr. Everything almost starts at that time. A lot happens at that time. Tawaf enters, shaving and shortening enters. You can move on from Muzdalifah after that, and the time for stoning enters there, of the Jamra al-Aqaba. So it begins there and it ends with the end of the days of Tashriq. So the days of Tashriq are what? The 11th, 12th, and 13th. So Jamra al-Aqaba, which is stoned on the 10th, begins at the midpoint between Maghrib and Fajr on the eve of the 10th and lasts until Maghrib on the 13th. Got plenty of time to do it. So no reason to rush and endanger yourself or others. The stoning for the days of Tashriq, the 11th, 12th, and possibly the 13th if you stay, if you don't leave on the 12th. The time begins for each of those days with Dhuhr, with the Dhuhr prayer's entrance on that day, and the time for all of the days exits with the end of the days of Tashriq. So the stoning for the 11th begins at Dhuhr on the 11th and ends at Maghrib on the last of the days of Tashriq. The stoning for the 12th begins at Dhuhr on the 12th and ends at Maghrib on the last of the days of Tashriq, and similarly the 13th. It begins at Dhuhr on the 13th and then ends with Maghrib on the 13th. The best time, however, for each day is that one stones before Maghrib on that day. And it's best right after Dhuhr. That's the best time, and the preferred time lasts till Maghrib, and then after that it's not considered a makeup. La ilaha illallah. But with Maghrib on the last of the days of Tashriq, the opportunity to stone is over. Each of the jamras is stoned again with 7 stones. They must be thrown one by one, and you start with the small jamra, then the middle jamra, then the kubra, then the greatest jamra, and you stone them in that order on the days of Tashriq. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stones on each day. You do that 2 or 3 days. La ilaha illallah. And then the farewell tawaf is the last thing one does prior to exiting Mecca. And it is 7 circuits, just like the integral tawaf and the qudum, and has other sunnahs that are similar. And it's how you bid Mecca farewell. And actually, it is an independent obligation for anyone leaving Mecca to beyond a distance where they may shorten prayers. If they're traveling a long journey away from Mecca, they should do a farewell tawaf, whether performing Hajj or Umrah or residing in Mecca or so on. It's an independent obligation honoring Mecca that one should perform. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa baraka alayhi wa alayhi. So those are some duties of the Hajj. 5 duties of the Hajj to go with the 5 integrals of the Hajj. And may Allah enable us to make accepted performances of Hajj to His sacred house by His mercy, and He's the most merciful and merciful. I can take a couple questions before we close, inshaAllah ta'ala. Yes?
I know how with tawaf, because the Kaaba extends up to the lower heaven, you can do it on the upper floor. But what about the sa'i? Can you do those on the upper floor?
The sa'i, I don't know. Remind me those who remind me for things to review that. Yeah. The question is, may you do tawaf? The Kaaba is the Kaaba to as-sama ad-dunya, to the lowest of the layers of the skies. The Kaaba is Kaaba. So you can do tawaf on the upper layers of the mosque. Even if the mosque was built 10 stories high, you could do tawaf on that 10th story. The question was, can you do sa'i on the upper levels? And the answer I gave is, I don't know. I have to review that. I've not come across the question in the books. And Allah knows best. So inshallah I'll review it.
You know, you talked about the men surrounding the woman to protect her and not doing it properly. I mean, would there ever be a time when you could say to them, "You're not doing it"? I feel so bad that people don't do it properly.
Yeah. Well, one, there's, it's likely that there's maybe some legal judgments that are easier than the one that we're teaching. And also one could gently remind them. And because they were Yemenis, I actually did remind them. Yeah. They typically follow the Shafi'i school, most Yemenis do, so we wanted to remind them of that. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Any other questions? Ya Allah, bi husnul khatimah. We ask Allah to give us to be sincere, honest, that He give us to teach well, apply what we've learned, and call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He accept our works, and that Allah be pleased with us and please the heart of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and that the reward of the Fatiha, So we recite, go to our parents, teachers, sheikhs, anyone we owe rights, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Fatiha.